I've heard some adjectives like high in relation to risk, great in relation to havoc. Potential for runaway is very great. We need to now proceed before there is a catastrophe. Are you able to, in any way, quantify how great the risk is or how likely havoc might be if this isn't passed? And
Well-
if you have to go to the FAA instead?
Yes, the Mackinac Island Carriage Tours, which is the world's largest operator of this kind of transportation, has been extremely concerned about it, and they're very much afraid that there will be a catastrophic runaway, and they are in a very unique position to be able to, I think, make that assessment. And their assessment is that there's great danger, and they have been very active in pushing for this kind of a solution. And as a matter of fact, they had a representative on the special task force that was set up through legislation that the legislature passed 2 or 3 years ago, setting up a sort of an advisory group. And that advisory group, which had the Carriage Tours representative on it, came back specifically citing Mackinac Island as being in need of special consideration regarding drone regulation.
Thank you.
Representative Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague has already asked some of the questions I was going to ask. Good questions. So you're kind of asking us to pass the law, then get permission? And what happens if you don't get permission?
Well, the city
I mean,
won't.
that's what it seems to me. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Well, the city will not be able to regulate drone activity, and what we're saying is we do want the feds to consider this whole issue, but they would do it through making Mackinac Island a
Well, I understand
fixed
that. I
site
understand that.
designation.
It just seems like, and the way I'm understanding it is you want us to pass it, then they're going to ask for permission. Am I wrong?
Well, I'm not sure.
I don't know. It just seems that way. It seems like the FAA has some ruling over this, and they have the final say.
But in the meantime, in the meantime, they haven't forbidden the city to do something.
Well, I thought I read somewhere that it is forbidden for a local government to pass ordinance on that. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Representative Shepard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a point of clarity, they cannot forbid it by weight. So drones by weight. So if it's under a certain amount of weight, then it kind of falls under an exemption that's not covered by the FAA. And I think that's what you're asking for, correct, is a weight. What is the current ordinance in Mackinac Island right now regarding drones?
Well, there is none.
Which you could implement one currently, and the only thing that you'd be looking at changing would be the weight restriction portion of it that's not seen by the FAA. So you could currently have an ordinance restriction about drones. You currently could. There's nothing that bans the city from doing that. Just so you're aware, you can
Okay.
do that.
Yeah, okay.
So you could do that through your ordinance department. And honestly, where it gets into the trickiness of it is if you did an outright ban of drones, somebody could have the argument that this drone weighs less than whatever the weight restriction is, but that would have to go through lawsuit and other things. I highly doubt that you'd run into a huge problem with that, but I digress on that. So since you don't have a current ordinance, has there been one discussed that maybe specifies certain things in regards to the horse and carriages?
Well,
an
again,
outright ban?
I think the hope was that there would be the site designation accorded by the feds, which would solve the whole issue.
Right, because one of the things that we wrestle with in the legislature is passing a statewide bill that does certain carve-outs. Okay, that's always been kind of a sticky situation, especially on something where locals actually have some tools to be able to do an ordinance on it. And trying to get to the bottom of that is probably where some of this is going to get some heartburn with members because of what it is, because I could probably think of about 15 other people that want carve-outs as well. So it's like once you open a floodgate, how big of a floodgate do you open? My suggestion, and maybe this isn't going to work, is to, if you were going to, as an island, actually put the ordinance in place, because you can do that legally. Obviously, you're going to run into some of the issue with the weight if somebody were to get that deep into the weeds that would even know that that's a thing. But it'd just be something where it'd probably be a little bit different in my perspective if the city had already been proactive and created the ordinance on the drones now. And then you're coming to us with a bigger potential issue. Just a suggestion.
Again, I think ultimately the intention is that the feds would make the designation
Well, and that's also another-
justified fixed site facility.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, because last term, I feel like I've talked about drones for 4 years that I've been here. Last term, when drone legislation was introduced and a bunch of different changes to it, it came back to the same thing. Where's the feds ruling on it? Is it something that we wait on? Do we preempt something and all of a sudden everything that we preempted gets changed? You know, there's so many moving parts to that. Just a suggestion made, maybe look at the city creating an ordinance itself as well.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also wishing to speak on this, opposed to the bill, is Jason Gilman Jr., Michigan Coalition of Drone Operators. And Mr. Gilman, just we're on a kind of a tight time frame. We do have your presentation. Everybody's got it. So if you could be concise,
Absolutely,
the chair
sir.
would graciously appreciate
Yep,
it.
absolutely. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Before you, you have our written testimony, so I'll be brief, just kind of bullet point some things. We're approaching this from the technical perspective today. And to be clear, regulations or prohibitions of UAS operations in the navigable airspace over Mackinac Island will require either a fixed site designation or some other FAA action or regulation to work. I believe that's why, you know, as Mr. Cawthorn mentioned, that was part of the bill. Anything before then, while they might be able to regulate landing and launch operations, the actual overflight would be prohibited by the FAA and Mr. Representative Shepard. That would be irrespective of weight, from everything I can tell. Basically, anything in the navigable airspace would fall under the FAA's purview under 49 U.S.C. 4103. There are also additionally regulations in place that already prohibit hazardous operations. I guess the big thing I'd like to ask even is, has Mackinac Island talked to the local flight standards district office? That would be the one would be in Grand Rapids. That would be relevant for them. It seems like they would be most appropriate to talk to about addressing any concerns, which I can understand. But I think that, you know, before going the legislative route, Mackinac Island should talk with the FAA and see what they can do to make sure everything is kosher in that regard. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
We do. Representative Afendoulis.
Just a brief question, and it's regarding weight. It says that drones weighing less than about half a pound are exempt from any regulation. The local unit.
Yeah, so,
how many? I mean, how many little ones? How many? You know what?
Yes, so basically the ones operating under that 0.55 pound weight limit there, that would be, those would be, you know, you just go to the, you know, toy store or something like that. However, given that the FAA would still have purview, it wouldn't necessarily fall under 107, Part 107 of Title 14 of the CFRs, but it would most likely fall under Part 101. And as I mentioned, 49 U.S.C. 4103 basically says Congress has granted the FAA the exclusive jurisdiction to control the navigable airspace. And for low-level operations, that includes drones as well, regardless of weight.
Right, right. Okay.
Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Very good. Representative Shepard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick. So would it be in your opinion that something could be worked out within the island itself without going a state route that could probably appease the situation going forward?
I believe so, sir. And actually, in the preemption statute under subsection 3, section 5, subsection 3, it talks about FAA preemption and how our preemption law obviously can't go over that. So basically, if the city worked with, the FAA and found, either FAA regulations or the FAA's like, there are certain things you can regulate. That might actually ultimately require some state legislation, but I think that's something that should be worked out with the FAA first, and then we can revisit the issue legislatively here.
Thank you, sir.
Very good, Mr. Gilman. Oh, any other questions I should ask real quick? Mr. Gilman, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
You're welcome. Also here today, but not wishing to speak in support of the bill, is Daniel Gregory from Kelly Cawthorn, and also supporting the bill, Amy Drum from the Michigan Retailers Association. Thank you very much.